This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So discussing that Syrian strike ordered by President Trump, Joint Chiefs of Staff General Joseph Dunford described in detail the three targets that were struck by U.S. missiles.
The targets that were struck and destroyed were specifically associated with the Syrian regime's chemical weapons program. We also selected targets that would minimize the risk to innocent civilians. The first target was a scientific research center located in the greater Damascus area. This military facility was a Syrian center for the research, development, production, and testing of chemical and biological warfare technology. The second target was a chemical weapons storage facility west of Homs. We assessed that this was the primary location of Syrian sarin and precursor production equipment. The third target, which was in the vicinity of the second target, contained both a chemical weapons equipment storage facility and an important command post.
So those are the targets and the basis for their selection. What did it accomplish other than eliminating those targets and defending a red line that President Obama wouldn't defend? For an answer to that question, we're pleased to be joined by Colonel Cedric Leighton. He is a CNN military analyst who also had previously served the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council. Colonel Leighton, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime, Dan.
So we got the policy framework and legal framework from Mattis. We got the kind of military details from Dunford. By Sunday, it's reported that Assad had already resumed bombing so-called rebel areas, including civilian homes. So this strike accomplished what exactly?
Well, that's going to be the big problem. We wanted to send a very specific message and go after their chemical research and development and storage facilities, just like General Dunford spoke about. But when it comes to their ability, Syria's government's ability to actually carry out strikes, they can do so. And this particular set of targets was not designed to accomplish that, take care of their helicopters or take care of their fixed-wing aircraft, which are basically on their last legs. But still, it's dangerous for civilians, and they're going to use any opportunity they can, the Syrian government is, to go after these civilian targets because they consider them threats to that government and basically their impediments to their final victory in the Syrian civil war.
Now, officials on Syrian TV claim that this is a cowardly act, and they said that the missiles missed their marks. Is there any proof that we did accomplish what we set out to do?
Yes, there is proof, Amy, and basically that proof is from the battle damage assessment is what it's called, these pictures that you may have seen in the Pentagon briefing on Saturday. And what they showed, there was also video footage from the ground, in some cases from Syrian TV itself, that showed a lot of structures being damaged by the strikes. So the proof, it's kind of hard to look at intelligence and have a legal standard of proof with that, and that can of course get you into a bit of trouble, as we've seen with Iraq and some other situations. But the proof that we have is not only the pictures that you saw, but also eyewitness accounts, and the further proof will be in terms of their production capability. See how impacted that is, and that will take a longer time to actually determine whether or not that's true. But so far, the Pentagon assessment is, I think, pretty much in concert with what's actually happening.
Well, speaking about their capacity going forward, it was Dunford in the presser with Mattis that suggested that the taking out of these three targets, the strike, has severely damaged Syria's ability to produce chemical weapons. It has set it back for years, he said, and that has been called into question by other military analysts who suggest that making such an assessment that quickly is unusual and perhaps a bit overstated, and it's probably not the case that it set back Syria's weapons program, chemical weapons program, that long. Number one. Number two, chemical biological weapons are somewhat ubiquitous, so it certainly, this strike doesn't prevent Syria from the Assad regime from using chemical weapons on its own population again.
Well, that last part is absolutely correct. They are not being prevented from using them again. In technical terms, in political terms, they can expect a reaction, especially if they add a nerve agent to chlorine, which is apparently what happened in Duma, which sparked this whole thing. So the assessment is that at that time they used a mix of chlorine and the nerve agents sarin, that it becomes very dangerous, obviously, for any target. Getting back to the first part of what what you mentioned about General Dunford, yes, I would agree that it is a bit premature to actually say that we have accomplished a setback of their chemical weapons production aspects to that extent. I think there is certainly some setback, but for years, that quote, that may be a bit too far, because they can, like you said, there's a way to reconstitute this. We didn't destroy any of their brain power that was associated with these programs, and as a result of that, they have help from Russia, from Iran, and potentially from North Korea that would also, cause them to have ways to get these weapons back into production and back into use. And so I would be a bit more cautious than General Dunford was in that assessment.
Well, there seems to be no way to avoid being dragged into their 7-year civil war. But over the weekend, at the emergency UN meeting, Nikki Haley said that we have troops in Syria. How long do you think they're going to remain there?
Well, their mission is a different one, supposedly, and that is, to go after ISIS. Now, they have another mission which is not spoken about, and that is to protect the Kurdish elements of the Syrian population and the Kurdish fighters from the Turks, which is our NATO allies. So, the complications that you alluded to, Amy, are absolutely there. How long will they be there? It's hard to say, but I'm thinking they're not going home anytime soon, unfortunately. But I think they're going to be there for probably at least a year, but it really depends on the situation on the ground and how the mission evolves. If it becomes a mission that goes after the Assad regime, then those particular troops may not be involved in that, but there will be other troops, from all the services that would be involved in doing something like that. Depending, it's basically, as Nikki Haley said, all up to the Syrians, and that is something that becomes really important going forward.
Why not target Assad with the missile strikes and go after him the way that Reagan went after the Gaddafi family in the wake of the Lockerbie bombing? Why not go after the head of the chicken?
Well, if it were up to me, I probably would have gone after the head of the chicken in this case. I think Assad is a war criminal, and I think that the quicker we get rid of him or put him, in front of an international tribunal that, a la Nuremberg or something like that, the better off the world will be, and certainly the better off the Syrian people will be. The problem that a lot of policymakers look at when they make decisions like this is what happens afterwards. And, if Assad is taken out, who follows him? And nobody knows the real answer to that question. If Syria,
I think that's a fair point. But if the problem is we don't know who follows Assad, and that's why we're not going to target him, then what is exactly we're doing? Because it seems like for the last 7 years, we've been trying to affect regime change. We're not a humanitarian agency. We're not there to just set up refugee camps. So what exactly is the point of all this if it's not to take him out? And if we don't think we can take him out, then what is the point of being there?
Well, I think that's a really fair point as well, Dan. And my basic view on it is you take the risk. You go in, you take out Assad, or make it very painful for him, which has, in some cases, the same effect. And you let the chips fall kind of where they may, with a bit of controlling with in terms of the fallout from something like that. But I think the real problem is that the policy has been unclear across both the Obama and the Trump administrations. Trump has given it a bit more clarity with the action last year, as well as what just happened over the weekend. But the problem then becomes, if on the one hand you say we're not there for regime change, and yet the problem is the regime, there's an inner contradiction with that, and it's really hard to square that circle.
What about more safe zones, a more stringently enforced no-fly zone, safe zones that we operate? This is something that essentially the Wall Street Journal editorial board is suggesting as next steps, in addition to continuing to put the pressure on Russia through sanctions to eliminate its chemical arms from Syria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it was similar to the Wall Street Journal proposal is similar to what Senator McCain advocated even several years ago. I think the idea of safe zones or no-fly zones in certain areas is certainly something to be looked at, and it would put pressure on the Syrian regime. It would take a while. It wouldn't be something that would topple that regime overnight. In some ways it becomes a way in which we get involved very quickly, or even gradually in that horrible civil war. But it's something to be looked at. I would say that in combination, we basically put the whole country into a no-fly zone, and which would, unlike with Iraq back before the last Iraq war, where there were certain areas where Saddam could fly his helicopters, we prevent them from flying all their helicopters. That would have an effect. But right now we've got an issue where the Syrian regime appears to be winning the civil war, and we would have to act very quickly if we wanted to change that.
Right. So if they're winning the civil war, Assad's staying, then it's difficult to make the argument we're doing something material to prevent Iranian hegemony and Russian presence in the Middle East. So, if we're not going to go after Assad, then are people like Jeffrey Sachs right? We should get out of Syria.
Well, that is certainly an argument. My view is that if there is a violation of the laws of war, of the laws of armed conflict, such as there is when you use chemical weapons against a civilian population, you have to take a really hard look at eliminating the regime. So you have basically we're at a fork in the road. Either you do what Jeffrey Sachs says, or you take this guy out, take Assad out, and you do it in a way that that minimizes damage to innocents, but you make sure that the pressure is on. So I think what we have is, as usual, some type of hybrid policy that is leaning more toward eventually getting rid of the Syrian regime, even though they don't always say it that way. And that particular effort is going to be really hard to sustain over the next few years, which would certainly take years if it was to be successful. And the likelihood of its success diminishes every day that advances are made by the Syrian government.
He is Colonel Cedric Leighton, CNN military analyst and security consultant who served on both the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council. Colonel Leighton, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
You bet, Dan. Anytime. Thank you so much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.